Welcome back to Scripps News' special coverage of the funeral of President Jimmy Carter. Within the half hour, Carter's body will arrive at the National Cathedral ahead of his state funeral at 10 a.m. Eastern. Carter, who died at the age of 100 on December 29th, was the longest living president in U.S. history.
And he will be remembered not only for the service as the country's 39th president, but also for the work he did for 4 decades after leaving the White House. That work continues today at the Atlanta-based nonprofit organization that bears his name, Carter Center. Staffers work here and abroad to protect human rights and eradicate disease.
Yeah, we know that was so important to President Carter, and President Carter's decision to establish the Carter Center was just one example of his lifelong commitment to brokering peace.
Yeah, but the most famous accomplishment in that regard is the Camp David Accords. Carter worked in brokering this historic agreement between Egyptian President Anwar Sadat and Israeli Prime Minister Menachem Begin in 1978. Was one of his crowning achievements. So we are joined now this morning by President Carter's, one of his friends, a former ambassador to Norway, Tom Loftus. And Ambassador Loftus, thank you very much for joining us. I know your life intersects with the president 2 different times, one in Wisconsin where you are from, but also while you're in Norway in the 1990s as President Clinton's ambassador. Give me a sense about how important those Camp David Accords were and Carter's legacy around creating peace around the world.
Well, the Camp David Accords still hold between Israel and Egypt. I think that President Carter brokered these accords. The Egyptian leader Sadat and the Israeli leader Begin had made ventures towards each other but could not make a deal. So Carter was the one that brokered it, and he deserves all the credit in the world. He certainly deserved the Nobel Peace Prize at the time, but that didn't happen, and he received it later.
I want to ask, when we look back on his legacy on foreign policy, this is obviously such a significant achievement, but one of the things people also talk about is the Iranian hostage crisis, and I'm curious if his achievement in brokering the peace deal, from your view, has been overshadowed in his legacy by that crisis.
Well, so much happened in foreign policy during the 4 years of the Carter administration. We have to recall that the Soviet Union invaded Afghanistan. President Carter put we didn't go to the Olympics in Moscow. There was a grain embargo which hurt him very greatly with farmers, including Wisconsin. The Iranian hostage situation certainly overshadowed everything at the time. But when we look back, we see a lot of pluses, and certainly the Camp David Accords are one. Plus his bringing to the fore human rights in United States foreign policy. I think in years to come, historians will look back at that and say that that was a major change in United States foreign policy.
Ambassador Loftus, I know that you're in Norway for the Oslo Accords under President Clinton, but it's during that time period while you're in Norway that you also get to meet and spend more time with President Carter in his post-presidency. What are some of the defining moments? What are some of the personal stories? What are some of your memories of those times together?
Well, he came to Oslo twice, basically to thank the Norwegians for the amount of aid that they had given the Carter Center for his disease control efforts in Africa. We spent several days together. An ambassador and a former president is one thing, but a former Speaker of the House and a former governor, you get along pretty good. And he was just a very personal man. We met with the Prime Minister, we met with the leaders of the political parties, and one leader of a political party in particular, the leader of the Christian Democratic Party. This party was the main advocate of foreign humanitarian aid in Norway. The leader was a Lutheran minister, and the two of them and I went to lunch, and they talked about teaching Sunday school. It was a pretty poignant moment. Carter could explain very well why it was important to focus on especially two diseases in Africa for the rest of the world. That this was not only the humanitarian thing to do, there was medicine and systems to do it, and it should be done. This is what the moral obligation of the West, if you want to call it, but the rest of the world is. And he was very good at making that point, and it's one you can't refute.
And Ambassador Loftus, I do want to ask you, because as much as foreign policy was a defining part of his presidency and those relationships, what we saw in his post-presidency was a former president who kept up his involvement in foreign affairs, visiting China multiple times, offering to help with conversations with North Korea at certain points. And so I'm curious how important that was to him and what his view of the state of foreign affairs today was.
I'll tell you one incident. We were waiting in the VIP lounge in the Oslo airport for his departure time. Now that lounge was just a separate room with a coffee vending machine, and the Dalai Lama walked in. A complete surprise, and the three of us sat and talked. I had just had dinner with the Dalai Lama at the Chancellor's residence in Madison before. The Dalai Lama asked Carter to arrange a meeting with China, between the Dalai Lama and China. Now, this was a heavy lift, for sure. Carter said he would do it when there was a change in the leadership in China. And that is what he did. He was known from throughout the world is that if you needed a tough job done, he would do it. He would give it a try. And as you mentioned, in North Korea and in China and others, he did.
Yeah, Ambassador Loftus, we thank you so much for joining us. He was very active, really, through so much of his life, even up to the final couple of years.
Yeah, he certainly was. We'll be right back after a quick break.